Hello, my name is Serena Riley. I'm the Director of Customer Experience here at LlamaSoft, and together with my colleague Mallory Elias Svengros, who is our Analyst of CX, we're here to talk to you today about building a fully integrated and closed-loop VoC program from scratch. So the agenda for today is going to include the few reasons as to why we believe that the VoC program is important and why you should stand one up within your organization if you don't already have one. The strategy around how we built, or key factors in how you should build one, and then we'll be sprinkling in examples of our own as well. 4 steps to creating a VoC program as we laid them out and as how our strategy developed. The success measurements of how we're measuring whether this program is providing value to the rest of the organization, providing value to our customers and other stakeholders, as well as some lessons learned and success factors, because no one wants to, you might as well learn from somebody that's gone through setting this up from scratch as opposed to stumbling upon it and through it yourselves. So wanted to just kind of start off and provide a quote of something I keep in mind as I was building out this program. And it's from Albert Einstein: everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. I really feel like the VoC program is the heartbeat of an organization. All of the feedback runs through it, and it should pump out insights to keep your business going. Anything that is essential can be complicated, and sometimes we over-engineer things and make it more complicated than it needs to be. But if we keep it simple, it's going to be easier to understand, easier to use, easier to scale and sustain. And ultimately, more likely than not, that'll make it easier for other business units within your organization to adopt it as well. So some of the reasons why it's important that a VoC program exists within an organization, found these different stats and metrics from a Salesforce customer experience study that was recently done. 67% of customers say their standards for good experiences are higher than ever. We know that in the world that we're living in today, when everything is so much more remote than it used to be, that experiences have to be different and have to be more elevated to ensure that they're meeting the needs and experiences that we have in today's world. 51% of customers say most companies fall short of their expectations. 62% of customers say they share bad experiences. Alternatively, 72% of customers say they share good experiences with others. So making sure that narrative is being told in the right way so that word of mouth can really maximize your value. So ensuring those good experiences are being shared, are more prevalent than the bad experiences is key. And then 67% of customers say they'll pay more for good experiences. So with that, 76% of the consumers expect companies to understand their needs and expectations through the following 4 areas. One being connected journeys. People want a seamless experience. They want to know that if they're calling into support and they get transferred to another team, that they don't have to repeat that story again and have to start all over with that conversation, that conversation can be seamless between teams. Personalization. So we're collecting a lot of different data points and feedback and different things from our customers. And if we're not using that to personalize their experience and make it more tailored to what it is that they want and what they need, then we're missing, a lot of the value that we can bring here. Innovation. So people want to keep what's working well, but they also want to see new innovative things, new innovative products or services that they hadn't considered wanting or needing before. Innovation is a way that we can help improve that experience by offering them something new and something different. And then data protection. We know, again, we're collecting so much more data now than we were previously. And while that's great and it's good for gathering those additional insights and learning how to better personalize things, people are also very keen on what you do with their data and being sure that you're protecting and using that in a safe way because if we lose the trust with them, then we're going to lose that loyalty too. So part of that strategy of how we're going to build out this program is very aligned with what your CX strategy should include, which is customer understanding, design, measurement, governance, culture. It's very much a two-way street. That CX strategy should inform your VoC program, and that VoC program should inform your CX strategy. So there are 4 different steps that we've got here of how you can align that strategy. One is to listen. You want to collect that feedback from your customers and employees about the experiences. Remember that customer experience is that data and that feedback can come from your customers directly, but it can also come from your employees that are serving the customers. And each of those may have, similar themes and trends, but they may be different, and you may be able to find ways to innovate on that experience you're creating. Number 2 is learn. So once you have gathered that feedback, then you're going to take that and analyze it to understand those historical and current trends and themes. So we don't want to only look at what is happening right now, but we also want to look at what is happening over time. Are there themes and trends that are happening based on the length of a relationship with your customer or things of that nature? So, forward and backward looking are very important. Number 3 is act. We want to make sure that we're collaborating with our internal business units, sharing this information, creating an improvement action plan with these folks, and really doing something with what you're getting feedback on. And then finally, number 4 is acknowledge. So you have to also speak to those customers and let them know what you're doing with their feedback. You want to close that loop with them, let them know that you have heard them and that action is taken. So listen to learn and then act to acknowledge. Those are the 4 key steps that we've got here, how to create that strategy. So number 1 of that voice of customer program strategy action is that listening component. So first, you want to take a look at and evaluate and update those survey programs that you have running within your organization. One of the hurdles that we had was having a lot of different teams owning different surveys, sending them out to many different people at all times, no coordination of efforts on that, which would inundate our customers with additional surveys that they might have already answered questions on previously that now they're getting asked again. 2 is identifying all those sources where the feedback is flowing into your organization. So you've got a lot of employee business groups that are capturing some of that, but what are those external sources as well? Social media, different your journey maps that you're working through, different customer interviews and advisory boards. Number 3 is consolidating the sources into a centralized repository. So once you have all of that feedback and those sources identified, you need to pull those all into one central area, because having that central location is where you're going to be able to pull out and better analyze that data holistically, as opposed to one bit at a time. And then number 4 of this is developing a standard categorization and prioritization method. So ensuring that you're talking with the business about, the language they speak, the ways they want to filter and split that data, finding those ways that you can categorize that data so that it makes it easier when it comes time to sharing that out with them.
So as our customer support team was informally collecting feedback through their conversations with customers, as were our account teams, some internal folks would go through support or others straight to the engineering and development. Some would do both, and their items of feedback would be counted multiple times. So due to this overwhelming number of support items and no defined mechanism for tracking which ones were being entered or addressed. Typically only the high priority or emergency items were prioritized. There was a huge backlog of pieces of customer feedback that nobody was looking at. Only the things that would totally break the software were getting addressed. So by establishing the central repository of feedback from all channels across the organization, we were able to come up with a standard categorization of all of those types of feedback, which allowed us to quantify all of the pain points and then send smaller list of bite-sized, prioritized lists of things to accomplish to our engineering teams. So essentially, we took thousands of pieces of feedback and could figure out that, hey, maybe these 10 things are the things that we hear about from customers the most. Let's tackle those and then move on to the next set of 10. In addition, this helped us identify and action non-engineering feedback. So whether folks were having issues with accessing the support team or with paying their accounts or any number of things, we were able to send this feedback out to those teams as well, which had previously been overlooked.
Moving on to step number 2 on the learning side of things, you've now, identified those different feedback sources. You're aware that are across your organization. Now, the first thing you want to do is establish a baseline. That baseline is going to allow you to benchmark your performance against a global network of companies using that same standardized method. So, one of the issues that we had, one of the challenges that we had was that we didn't have a singular metric that could be measured or benchmarked against other organizations. So by us establishing that baseline, we were able to understand kind of what our starting point is, and then measure against, what our goal was of how to increase that metric, but also where did we stand against our competitors or against others in our industry. The second piece to that is define data segmentation. So again, kind of going back to that categorization step, once you've got that outlined and you've got that built into your data and your sources and feedback, you need to help to what those filters are that are going to be important to how your business evaluates that data. So are you going to split that data up by personas? Are you going to look at the size of the customers that you have? Are you going to look at the maturity or how long that they've been with your organization, or trend is with you? We had different segmentations, but there wasn't a common language being used amongst our different business units, which resulted in redundancy of requests from different channels, resulted in breakdown in communication in ways that customer-facing llamas were translating needs and expectations to our internal folks. Third piece of this is identify trends and themes. So again, once you've got that feedback, or once you've analyzed that a little bit more and divided that into the different segmentations that are important, you can then take and find different themes and trends that are happening. It helps you identify the severity of the pain points that you're looking at. It helps you identify perhaps things that that come through often that others may see as a minuscule or annoyance type of problem that you can now quantify as happening a lot. And those can kind of turn into those lower hanging fruits that you can tackle right away and make progress on.
So along those lines of learning, the first thing we did was to set up an NPS metric to formalize that survey along global best practices, so we'd be able to benchmark and use that as a KPI. But as I think most CX professionals are aware, the NPS metric, while great for tracking, is really not the meat of your NPS survey, but rather the feedback. So all of those items of feedback that we're now feeding into our repository, we're able to use data segmentations that were reviewed and agreed upon across all of the different business units in the organization to clearly communicate the customer feedback to those internal teams. So by using this language that was agreed upon by all the internal teams, it was easier for engineering specifically, but also other relevant account teams, finance teams, to use their expertise to develop solutions that met the customer needs, rather than us just trying to provide solutions. As I said, we were also able to assist other areas of the organization, so we were able to identify gaps in the sales process to follow up with the sales teams And actually, we get nearly as much feedback about our self-learning tools as we do about our product functionality, which we're able to use with our user experience and learning products teams to make the overall experience better for customers so that they can get more value out of our solutions.
So now that we've analyzed that data, we're going to move into the third step here, which is acting on that. You want to be able to make sure that you're collaborating with different internal business units to create those improvement action plans. So we can do that by doing reporting readouts. Depending on the cadence of which you run your NPS surveys, how often you're getting feedback, how much feedback you're getting. We ourselves run quarterly NPS surveys, so we are doing some of those readouts on a quarterly basis. But the idea there is to establish what those cadences are that make sense, so that you can, be the ones to speak what that data is saying and those insights that you're finding directly to those different business units that will be able to act upon it. You want to be able to evaluate the improvement opportunities and determine which initiatives have the biggest potential impact. So whether you want to go after some of those quick wins, or if you want to go after those things that might take a little bit longer, but ultimately are going to provide a bigger impact to the customer, those types of prioritization methods are something that you'll want to make sure that you're working with those internal business units to identify and move forward with. And then continuously adapting to align with the changing market conditions. I mean, this year of 2020 is a perfect example of changing market conditions. I don't know how many different pivots we've all done throughout this year, but as the needs of our customers change, we have to change and adapt to that as well. So one of the hurdles that we ran into with this was that because, as we mentioned before, we had so much feedback that was coming from different groups and organizations straight to our engineering department. It was kind of straining that relationship with them. It was, we were overwhelming them with a disorganized amount of feedback that if I can completely empathize with and understand that the high priority on everything, the urgency of everything means that probably nothing is going to be seen as urgent after a while. So the second piece to that was defining action plans. So determining again what that prioritization criteria is. What is the percent of work or resources that are going to be dedicated or allocated specifically to these types of VoC insights? Creating step change improvement. So we know that you can't do everything all at once. We know that, again, crawl, walk, run. What are the little things that we can start with today? What are some of those quick wins that we can get? And then let's move on to some of those things that are the root cause analysis of them is going to be much deeper and more involved. And then making sure that we're communicating items that won't be completed because they don't meet our organization's strategy. So we know that all feedback from customers is not always going to be something that aligns with the strategy of where we're taking our organization and where we're trying to build and grow into. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't acknowledge that feedback and let them know that we're not going to be doing something with it. So communicating that as well is important. And then the third piece here is tracking that action. So developing those improvements to the products, services, and experiences, actually getting that work in progress, and then automating any of those progress updates so that you can keep those stakeholders updated. And then making sure that we close out these VoC items so that we are maintaining that backlog, growing forever long, and it looks like we're not making progress when in actuality we are. So ultimately what you're looking to do is, create a system of that decision making based on this data that you're feeding back into the organization, making those data-driven decisions of what you should tackle next, of how important it is to tackle it, of what impact that's going to have for the customers as well as your business.
So when we went to act on this program, we identified 2 work streams in CX that we needed to pursue to successfully execute a VoC program. The first work stream was the survey improvement process. So as we mentioned before, there were different surveys happening. So CX has taken ownership of the customer surveys and begun aligning them to global best practices for design and execution. For example, we adjusted the cadence to reduce survey fatigue. We used to be asking a lot of surveys all the time. We now refreshed survey questions so that we can prompt customers to give us a lot of feedback each time they choose to take the survey instead of hearing the same questions over and over. Obviously, besides the NPS rating question, which stays standard. We want to make sure we're asking the right customers the right questions. So we've started different versions of our survey based on customer personas, and also being able to do deeper dive analyses based on the feedback that we find. And then the second thing that we needed to do was to review our engineering intake process. So as Serena mentioned, the relationship had become strained over the years of us just inundating them with tons of feedback from all areas of the customer-facing departments. So we went through a formal process to tie the feedback that we received to the roadmap that they were already working on. So that includes working with them to do additional customer research where necessary on different pain points, or if we find some quick wins, just tying them to similar work that's already being done. So the process that we have set up with our engineering group is that we receive the feedback from our various surveys, community events, journey mapping interviews, support calls, and just direct customer contacts. Account teams, once they have conversations, will pass information on to us. And those feedback stories are separated out by the categories that we had previously agreed on, and then sent through to product owners who can review them and determine whether or not the things that we've outlined are aligned with our strategy, as Serena mentioned, and are things that are already being worked on or already maybe have a solution that that customer hasn't thought of, or whether or not that's an item that we need to do more research on. Then those team leads will link in any of that existing feedback to the existing stories, themes, epics. I believe those are agile terms that I am not super familiar with, but that's where we pass it on and let them use their expertise. Sometimes we'll have to create new themes for brand new ideas, and then occasionally assign as more research required to go out and work with the user experience research group, or assign something as that we're not going to be pursuing it. Those solution experts will then help us fill in some evaluation metrics to prioritize the newer items that have come in and determine what gets included in the roadmap. And then all of this, we're able to track the items that we specifically put into the engineering system so that we can report back out to customers the timeline for the production of the item of feedback that they requested, or we can let them know the reason we're not going to be pursuing the thing that they suggested. So at least we've let them know that we've heard them, and though we're not going to pursue it, we want to motivate them to continue to provide us feedback in the future.
So with creating those action plans, the next piece, as Mallory just alluded to, was the acknowledgement. We want to make sure that for positive feedback, it's extremely valuable, not just to hear and celebrate what's working really well, but it also validates the behaviors and experiences that you should continue promoting. That neutral feedback identifies minor issues that those can be considered that low-hanging fruit that you can kind of tackle and resolve quickly, so that you can change that neutral customer into a promoter. We also find that with that neutral feedback, it tends to be more of the people that are, more happy than not and have really constructive feedback for how else they'd like to see their experiences improved. So not only minor issues, but also that constructive feedback for how we can continue to increase and improve those areas. And then the negative feedback, it should be responded to directly and as quickly as possible. That way you're going to, try and work to mend those relationships before any further damage happens to them. And some of the hurdles that we were seeing with this was we were only actioning negative feedback. We were only responding to, those customers that were irate or angry. We were not acknowledging receipt of the positive or of the neutral feedback. We weren't closing the feedback loop with customers. And whereas negative feedback tends to focus on the broken tools or bad experiences, the positive and the neutral feedback is where we find the most valuable insights into the ways that we can improve those existing offerings for our customers.
So in our quest to acknowledge, we wanted to make sure that we're closing the feedback loop with customers to confirm that their feedback was heard in action. So there are a lot of different ways that we acknowledge their feedback. We let their account teams know of feedback that is relative to the relationship, and so they can reach out and communicate with customers and find out more information if necessary, or to directly address any of the issues that customers have expressed with their account relationship. We also are able to follow up via newsletters and email campaigns. So once we aggregate feedback, we can work with our marketing teams via that internal collaboration to find ways to drive improvements based on the voice of customer feedback, and then send out some email blasts or highlights in our regular newsletters to highlight those things that we have done based on the feedback. We also set up recently a new community portal, so a website where customers can go and have forums to talk to each other. And also it's a one-stop shop of a lot of information, new things going on in LlamaSoft. So via that portal, we're working on launching a section that is just for new highlights of things that we've done based on their feedback. And then finally, in our NPS survey invitations, we like to highlight things that we've done based on feedback in previous quarters. So our invitation will often say something to the effect of, your feedback makes a difference. Here are some things that we've done based on your feedback. And then cite whether it's product improvements or honestly, the community portal idea in general was launched out of a lot of different things we had heard that customers wanted. So the last thing that I'm going to talk about are our success measurements. So as Serena mentioned at the beginning, one of the really important pieces is to set some baselines for yourself and then have ways that you can track yourself against those baselines to see how you're improving. As she said, it's crawl, walk, run. So you want to see where you are versus those baselines and versus your goals, and then continue to track that over time. You want to make sure that you establish the program, the players and processes, who's going to be accountable for each of these types of metrics. It's not always the CX team that is accountable for some of these. And as your program matures, you want to find ways to automate any manual processes as much as you can and democratize the data so that it can properly scale. So this is about the place that we are now in our program, where we're really trying to report on those things and build automated reporting on the metrics that we care about most. And you can see some of those are, the total number of pieces of feedback that we're getting and aggregating and passing through, our change in NPS score quarterly, but also the percent of the items that are put into production, or the percent of hours that the engineering team is dedicating to our VoC feedback versus the other types of things that they've got on their roadmap. The number of days on average to close out a feedback item. So as we mentioned, whether that be that it's going to be included in a new release, or whether it's something that we are not going to do, but at least we're closing it out and letting customers know. And then down at the bottom, really the effect that you're having, we measure both the number of customers and the dollar value affected. Just because only a few customers requested something via feedback doesn't mean it doesn't improve the situation for a lot of customers. So how many customers ultimately are going to be using that feature? And then finally, tracking the respondents that we're directly contacting to let them know that we have actioned their feedback. Aren't going to action it, but to continue to motivate them to provide feedback in the future.
All right, so we're closing up on our time with you today, and last thing I like to leave you with is to do or not to do. Don't reinvent the wheel. Learn from our mistakes. Learn what we've found is successful with these programs, and hopefully this will progress your programs even faster as well. So number one is aligning priorities, making sure that the business is aligned to pulling this customer feedback into the other areas of their strategy. So the individual business units pulling feedback into their strategy, as well as the bigger organization itself. Customer feedback is key to ensuring that you're listening and responding to your customers and showing that you appreciate what their feedback is. So ensuring that's a piece of your strategy is key. Be fluent. Don't force your agenda on other business partners. Make sure you're finding ways to speak in their languages. What are their goals? What are their measurements? How can you use the VoC insights to benefit that strategy? And then wash, rinse, repeat. Plug in. You want to find ways to incorporate the VoC insights into the existing processes and workflows that exist with business units already. The simpler you make this for them to use it, the more likely they're going to be to adopt it. And then from the success factors, there are three things we want to just share. One is, keep refreshing those surveys. Make sure that in times like this with COVID, that you're actually responding to what customers are thinking and feeling right now, and tailoring and tweaking that invitation and those questions to best serve them for that. One tip we have on this also is a way that you can hold business leaders accountable is by allowing them to ask a question on your survey if they agree to actioning those insights. So you've already got that baked in for that accountability there, and you've got no new questions to ask. Number two is recognize. Be sure to recognize those employees that are getting shout outs from the customers. That reinforces those customer-centric behaviors. It shows that you're not always just finding those negative pieces and honing in on those, that you're actually celebrating what's working well and amplifying those messages as well. And don't forget to recognize those non-customer facing employees. They need the love too. So even if they're not getting, direct call outs by name from customers, help recognize those non-customer facing employees so that they see that little thing that they do results in this reaction from our customers. And that'll keep pushing that behavior then. And finally, make sure that you're sharing those success metrics often and organization-wide. The more ways that you can bring awareness to the value and the power of the VoC, the more adoption of this program and of your insights you'll receive. Also, find ways that your VoC program can help your organization's strategic goals as well. I know sometimes we get stuck in our own priorities and initiatives and we focus only on those, or only on those business units that are trying to make progress in their own areas. But if we back that up a little bit and think about those strategic goals that we have on an annual basis or a 3 to 5 year plan basis, how can that VoC data and feedback inform improvements for meeting those strategic goals? I mean, ultimately, the more business outcomes that you're going to prove with this program, the more buy-in that you're going to get from that senior leadership group, and the more job security you're going to have, because they're going to keep coming back to you for more insights. So there's no way that you can overshare, over-recognize, over-communicate, over-align. All of these things are very key to this program. With that, we appreciate your time and your attention, and we hope that you have found, you know, some of those key bite-sized little snippets of information to continue building your VoC program, to start it from scratch if you don't have one yet, and to continue just maturing along that CX journey. As like I said, there's not one single way of going about this. But there are certainly keys to making sure that you're making progress and you're making this program more deeply rooted into the strategy of your organization. And start simple. It doesn't need to be complicated. Don't overthink it. Take some of these steps. Start small. You can do this, and you will see the value for it.